Welcome back. So today we are doing something a little bit different from our usual fare, which is instead of talking about science, I am going to be presenting a lecture I do for beginning graduate students at ISTBI here at Fudan University, namely, how do you give a scientific talk? So the first question, and this will be pervasive throughout our discussion today, is what is the purpose of the talk? And so we are focusing on a research talk that you might see at a conference. So this is maybe you have one paper or maybe a little bit more, but normally it's short, 10 to 30 minutes, 30 minutes being already quite a long. Very typical is half of that, so 15, 20. And there's other talks, types of talks you might see. So the seminar talk is, we and probably a lot of departments around the world, there's invited speakers, someone comes, they talk about the work they do in their group, and over several years, tend to be a bit longer, maybe even a full hour. If you go to a big conference especially, you might have a keynote where you have this eminent scientist and they speak about the whole field, maybe going back to the 1980s and all of the history. Often these tend to be long talks as well, and sometimes we do talks that are to lay people, and here you see all sorts of different formats, all sorts of different contents. And you might also see lectures like this one. So a lot of what we talk about today is applicable to any type of public speaking, but a lot is not. So here we are talking about how to give a scientific talk. And for example, this lecture would be an awful research talk. And you can see, for example, if you go the video I posted earlier this week about semi-bin, you can see how different it is from here. It's a lot more visual. And I think that one illustrates what I'm talking about, whereas this one, there's just a lot of text. And the reason is that I also make these lecture slides available so you can go back to them and you can check everything. So the lecture slides here, they serve a dual purpose of supporting me when I'm speaking, but also for you, the students, to be able to refer to them. But if you do a research talk like this one, that will probably not be a very good one, and because again the purpose is different. So, to whom are you speaking? And the questions you want to ask is, what do people know and what do they care about before you present, and what do you want them to know and care about after you present? And remember, people at a conference, generally, scientists are, people are smart and knowledgeable and all of that. But a conference, people are busy. They will see maybe 20 presentations, 50 posters. They'll talk to all of these different people, and it's just not physically possible, mentally possible that they will remember every single detail of every single and pay attention to every single thing. So you need to condense and make, and present only the main points of what you can do. So we're going to be, this is, as a rule of thumb, this is with the structure of your presentation, where you start with the background, then you talk about your specific problem, then you present your results, and then maybe at the end you summarize and conclude. So sometimes people use the word introduction, so you have the introduction, but I actually don't like that word because it seems a little bit overly broad. So what you want to do is you take the audience from where they are now, what they already care about, and make them care about what you are going to be presenting. So you might have to present a little bit of the broader context, but do ask yourself, what do people already care about? So if you are presenting, your work on, say, the metagenomics for antimicrobial resistance, and you are at the conference that's called, antimicrobial resistance, a crisis, you do not need to spend 2 or 3 minutes talking about how antimicrobial resistance is important. Everybody in the room already came to a conference that's called antimicrobial resistance, a crisis, and so they already convinced that it's a crisis. So now what you need to do is to convince them or explain why your metagenomics might be a good solution or might be a part of the solution to the antimicrobial resistance, because you probably have not solved the problem, right? You have not solved antimicrobial resistance. If you go to a neuroscience conference, you have not solved neuroscience. You have solved a specific problem, and you want to situate that specific problem in the broader context. And if you present the same work, for example, if instead you go to a conference that's on, tools for metagenomics processing, and that's the name of the session. Now, I can assume that everybody already cares about metagenomics, and now I need to take them from there to caring also about antimicrobial resistance. So this is why you have to think who are the people in the room, what do they know already, what do they care about, and then make them care about your specific problem. Then you present your work, and this should be at least 50% of the time should be your work. This should be new to the audience. So when I say your work, I mean, especially for students, this can be, your group's work, your plural you, y'all's work, Ian's work. But, this is why often also, even presentations, there's one person that presents, but sometimes the presentation might have multiple authors. But this should be the majority of time. I do think that you shouldn't present more background than is necessary to do this transition to, people care about the topic, broad topic. Now they should care about, the little thing that you've solved. And this is everything we all do is we solve little parts of a bigger problem. And, you do not need to present everything you've ever done. Even if you're presenting a paper, you do not need to present the whole paper. Again, you can check back on the talk I did on semi-bin, and you can compare. We had, 30 figures in that manuscript plus the second manuscript, and I've presented, half of that, half of figure 3, half of figure 2, and so in total, I haven't presented even 10% of everything we've done, but I've presented the main ideas. So again, this is about a research topic at a conference. If you're presenting to a broader audience, then maybe you do need to present a lot more background. But this is about you're at the conference presenting your work. So tell a story. So I find this is a very common piece of advice, but I find that sometimes it's not really understood what this means. So first of all, what it does not mean. It does not mean the real story of what happened. It doesn't mean like, oh, I was in the lab and then, and I was reading this paper and then my mate, she started talking about this other thing and then I connected. It can be done that way. I've seen it done that way. It can be done well. But what it means is a scientific story. What it means is that you're going to present something and then something else, and those things need to be connected and linked together in some way. So you have, there's this problem, and you had this idea to tackle it, and therefore you did this. However, you observed this, and therefore you did that. However, maybe there was this confounding effect, and therefore you did that. So all of these things are connected. It's not, and they're connected by however and therefore, so that there's a logical structure between when you present slides. So if you have a longer talk, if you're presenting a seminar, then you can often present, you do A and B and C, and you can think of these as little episodes, and where A individually maybe takes 15 minutes, and then within A you have this narrative, and then you present B, and within B you have this narrative. But if you're doing a shorter talk, then you can only do one arc, and things should follow each other logically. At the end, you summarize, repeat the key points, and sometimes you want to stop here. Sometimes you want to start here. Start with the summary slide. And if you have 10 minutes, you can really do two, you can really transmit two ideas. You know, three if that somehow they're linked together, so it's like 2.5 that you can get. But sometimes it's better you start here. So what do you want people to know at the end, and then every other slide needs to contribute to this. And sometimes when there's a slide that feels that okay, I feel that this belongs, but I don't know how to link it. Often this means that you need to revise your narrative. You need to think a little bit more about, try to understand that feeling. So why do you think it belongs there? And sometimes from there you can indeed build a narrative, and then things do flow better. So a very common mistake is not knowing how to end, and people end up doing what I'm doing now, which is trailing off and they please find some sort of catchphrase, whatever, that when you are done, you stop, and that's it. So maybe you need to acknowledge your co-authors, your funders, and then some people say things like, I will take questions. Sometimes that's not appropriate because there might be a chairperson who's doing that job of organizing questions. So me personally, I say I thank the audience for their attention, and then I stop. So this is just a common mistake, linked a little bit to the fact that you sometimes feel that towards the end of the talk people are the energy is sagging a little bit. So try to watch out for that. All right, so time split, just here we're doing 10 minutes. If you have 20, just multiply these numbers by 2. But do take into account that, so if you go to a conference and in the calendar it says, from 4 to 4:20, that's your slot. That does not mean that you get 20 minutes to speak. Generally speaking, that means you get maybe 16 minutes to speak, because there's going to be 1 minute at the beginning where you're sort of transitioning between the previous speaker and you. Someone will introduce you, say this is Miss so-and-so, and they're going to be talking about their great work, and then you want to leave maybe 3 minutes at the end for questions. So sometimes you can ask. Some more organized conferences, they will be more explicit about this. They will say you have X minutes. But if not, just assume that that if your slot is 20 minutes, aim for 16 to leave 1 minute for introduction, 3 minutes for questions. That's but sometimes you can just ask and people will tell you. So be respectful. Briefly acknowledge the invitation and the audience. Again, this doesn't, this shouldn't take more than a few seconds, but just polite saying, it's politeness. And also, as I was mentioning, do leave time for questions. And generally, if you're going to make a mistake, it's better to be too short than too long. So if you take 90 to 100% of the time that you are given, then that's probably very good. So if they say 16 minutes and you take 15 minutes and a half, that's pretty good. You are right on time. It's better to do that than to go in the other direction where there won't be any time for questions, which is so slides. So I've been talking about, so this is the presentation. So, and you have normally to prepare slides. So as I said, the slides I'm showing you today are not a good example of the kind of slides that you would want to show at the research talk. They're just too wordy, just too much. And here, these slides are meant to be read outside of the context of me lecturing as notes for the students, but this is not the point in a research talk. In a research talk, often there's going to be a manuscript as well, either and that will have all of the information, and the research talk is its own thing. So in general, reusing things is good. You don't want to do more work than you need to, but you do want to remember that each talk is a talk and the manuscript is not a talk. And so what does this mean? So in a manuscript figure, first of all, you often have not that much space. You might have a tiny little space where you want to convey all of this information, and readers, they can read the caption. They can go back and forth between the figure and the text. They can go back to the figure. They can spend more or less time on the figure. None of this is true in a talk. In a talk, you can have as many slides as you want. Your limit is time, but if you want to have 5 slides or 17, it's the same. There's no limit there. The limit is the time. On the other hand, the reader or the listener, they cannot go back and forth. They will only have the time that you show them the picture, and that's it. So what this implies is that in the slides you want to have less. And if you have a lot more things to show, that probably means you have more slides and not slides that are very full of things. Also, remember, each talk is different. So if you sometimes yes, you can reuse materials, but to whom is the talk? What do they know? What do you want them to know? So the other common mistake is you prepare the talk and you prepare them on your laptop. And when you're on a laptop, the distance between and I'm going to put, so this is the distance between me and the laptop here, right? And so even small fonts on the laptop I can read, but in a presentation, it depends on the projector. Even, this has gotten better, but even today, sometimes projectors are not very good. The lighting is not very good. People have to read it from, 30 meters away at the back, at the end of the room, even if it's not a very large room, people are still reading it. And so what can be read very easily on your screen cannot be read in a conference room with bad projector, bad lighting, and someone is at the back of the room and they cannot read what you've put out there. So animations and pre-prepared callouts. So a callout is when you have something that sort of pops, this is excellent. Like a little bit of eye candy, that's very good. But do not overuse. And then finally, be polished. A lot of things are really not. There's not a good or a bad way. Like should you use more color? Should you have things? But be consistent. In particular, if things start to look too copy pasted, it just doesn't look good. So it's more about being consistent than anything else. So generally, you will have text. Shouldn't have too much, and you shouldn't be reading it. So for example, here's an example where you have too much text. So if your slides say something like this, disease X is very important, blah, 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 blah. This is just too much. So this is what you want to be saying. So this is, maybe you can have this in the slide notes, speaker notes. So it's, a lot of tools give you this option of having some text that's only shown to you, the presenter. Maybe there you put the text, or you just remember it, and then in the actual text you have this, just the basic information about and the numbers, the references, and here, for example, putting the references, it's very awkward to read them out and to say orally, X et al. In the Journal of X in 2004, and if you're reading all of this, it's a little bit. This is better written down. People can also, find these references more easily if they have the actual name of the author instead of trying to find the right spelling. And then all of this narrative you can add orally. So have text, not too much, and don't read it. So it should not be reading. You should explain what you're showing. So if you have a plot, you should explain it. So some people that talk about the, back in the day when you had to write on the whiteboard, that naturally paced you, because you cannot write on the whiteboard faster than then you can talk. And that gave you some pace. Whereas now, well, with technology, I can show you a slide with a complicated plot with equations and text, and I just press a button, takes half of a second, and you have all of this. And me, the presenter, I know what's there because I did the slide, but the viewer, the people in the audience, they don't, and so you need to slow down for them. You should look at the audience, and you don't need to look at individuals. So a lot of people find it uncomfortable to look into people's eyes, especially maybe in a situation that's already a little bit stressful. You don't have to actually do this. So you can often find something behind the audience. If there's a point, maybe there's a clock, there's a plant, there's a crack on the wall, something you can focus there, looking over the audience or through the audience. But this will give the impression that you are engaging with them. And also watch your body language. So if you are too nervous and you're fidgety, that can be distracting. If you are too rigid, that can be a little bit distracting or demoralizing as well. So think about these things. Okay, all right. So as I said, you should leave time for questions. And what do you do when you have how do you handle questions? So here there's two things that can happen. So first of all, it goes without saying, you should be practicing your talk, and you should practice with some test audience, and that test audience should also ask questions and have the opportunity to ask questions. And at this point, the goal is to improve the presentation. And so what can you do if someone asks the questions? So the first one is you can improve the presentation and make the question go away. They asked something because it was unclear, and you can just make it clearer, and then nobody else will ask the same question again. That's just it. You can also prepare supplemental materials, and have questions that are where you have an answer that's pre-prepared. You don't present unless someone asks the question. Or number 3, you can just have that in the back of your mind, and have a pre-thought out answer. But you have to realize that there's never going to be a perfect presentation such that nobody ever gets confused about anything. So normally the first time you practice, the first time you do a talk, there's going to be a lot of number 1 where it's just the presentation is just suboptimal. There were aspects that you didn't realize because you have this expert blindness, like you know the work because you've done it, and so you don't know what other people don't know, and so you put all of these assumptions, and then when people ask these questions, you realize, this needs to be done a little bit better. I need to explain it better. I need to put this information on the slides and not assume that everybody knows or everybody can read my mind. And then once these basic questions are taken care of, then sometimes there's these other ones where you cannot answer everybody's questions. Okay, but now what do you do if people ask you questions in live, so in an actual presentation? So the first one is that it's good if people ask you questions. People will, if nobody asks questions, normally, that means that either everybody was very confused, or maybe you were presenting to an audience that was a mismatched audience. But if there's time for questions and nobody asks, it's normal. Normally that's not a good sign. You want some engagement. So, all right. So the first good case is, okay, someone asks a question, you know the answer, and you should answer. And here it's always important to realize you have two audiences, right? You have the immediate person who asked that question, and then you have the broader audience of everybody else who's listening in, and you want to be answering both. And so often the best way to do this is, you can keep the answer short. So say, you're engaging with the person and answering their question, but you don't want to then have that one person dominate the rest of the question and answer period. So you can use a formulation where you say, short answer, one sentence answer, and then you can say I can go into more detail offline or during the coffee break. And these are these are sort of these phrases, these scripts that you can have in the back of your mind, and if you go to a conference, you'll see that these scripts are used all the time. One thing that you should be careful about is do mark where you're speculating. So sometimes you might have an idea of the answer, but you cannot really show. But you can say, I don't have the data to answer that, but my guess is that. And then you are allowed to speculate because you've more clearly marked where your scientific knowledge ends and where you're speculating, you're hypothesizing, etc. All right. So if you don't know the answer, what do you do? So the first thing you can do is the person asks you X and you don't know X, but you know Y, or something that's a little bit related. So you can deflect, and again, you should be clear. This is what you're doing. You say, I don't know the exact answer to that question, but here's a slightly related thing that we are doing. And then you can very smoothly say, and therefore I can guess that the answer to your question would be blah blah blah. The other thing you can do is you can say, I don't know. You don't know. You can say that's a good question, but it was outside of the scope of this project. We don't know. And what's interesting is that there's going to be some questions that keep popping up, and this is why you can pre-prepare material. And often, if someone asks a question, you can follow up during the coffee break. This is the conferences are not for presentations. If it was just about the presentations, this is much better YouTube, because I can do it. I didn't even have to leave the house. I can just do my thing. I can put it online, and then people can watch it whenever they want. Whatever condition. And well, what you cannot do on YouTube so easily is to do this follow-up of going, hey, your question, I could only say, I only said yes or no but I have a lot of thoughts, let's talk about it. So this is what conferences really are about. So there's this rule of thumb that people use, should spend 30 seconds per slide or 1 minute per slide. It really depends. Depends on you, depends on your style, depends on each slide. Some slides take 10 minutes, maybe. That would be an exaggeration, but some slides can take a few seconds. Some slides can be a bit longer. Really, you need to test these things out. You need to practice. In generally speaking, do not be faster than if you were writing. And if English is not your first language, or if it's a language you're still trying to master, slow down. That normally, speak a little bit slower. This will probably make it easier for everyone. And so one thing, and this is what I do, is you should prepare, we're calling breadcrumbs, which means that you just have these notes about, slide number 4, which is the slide where, I'm showing my first results, that I should be at 3 minutes in, that's where I should be. And then, 5 minutes in, I should be at slide, 8. And then, so you have these markers every few minutes, and then you can keep monitoring the time live. And so this way, that if you're going a bit too fast, then maybe you need to slow down. Maybe you're just, with the nervousness, you're just sped up. And if you are a bit too slow, then you need to speed up, and you can monitor yourself throughout the talk rather than waiting for the final minutes and realize that that you've sped through everything and people had trouble following you, or you are going completely over time. So these breadcrumbs, they can help you. It can help you. All right. So practice. So you should practice the talk, the whole thing, from start to finish. You should also practice. Sometimes it's good to practice sections. So you practice. You realize that, oh yeah, there's this section where I every time I get and I don't know exactly what to say. Just do those slides, sometimes even a single slide. How do you do this one slide? Practice the end, as I said, because sometimes you see this curve of people start and they're enthusiastic, and then you see the motivation sagging, you see their energy sagging towards the end. Also, it's very natural to practice from start to finish. So the first half of the presentation has a lot more thought into it, a lot more practice, and then the second half is a bit of an afterthought. Don't do that. And then leave it natural if you can. Right here you can think about actors. If you think actors on stage or in a film, everything they say has been written down. Or 99% of what they say has been written down for them. And yet the goal is that when they say exactly what someone else wrote for them in exactly the setting that someone else prepared for them, it seems that it's natural. It seems that they really just thought of it. And to some extent, this comes from practice. There's this, when you practice at the beginning, it sounds a bit stilted, and at some point it becomes more natural because now it becomes a bit more ingrained and you're just talking. You can have notes. You can use the speaker notes. So I often have this one sheet of paper with these breadcrumbs, which is just slide 3, 2 minutes in, slide 7, 3 minutes. So just very, and it helps me keep track of where I am. All right, few more things that you should do. So here's you be you. And as I said, you have to think about who you're presenting to. You have to think, what do they care about? But if you are someone especially someone who's working in a interdisciplinary area, sometimes you might be presenting to an audience that's not really your comfort zone. And what you should avoid doing, and I think I've made this mistake when I was younger, is trying to present what you think they would like to hear, even if it's not it's not your strong suit. Don't do that. I mean, if you're there, someone thought that decided, and someone thought that you were a match. What you should need to pay attention to is, jargon. Are there things that, expressions, terms of art that in your field everybody knows about, but now you're presenting to someone else and they might just never have heard of that. And the other thing, the things that everybody knows, inside jokes, try to avoid all of that. So, and sometimes you might need to present less. So, if you're let's say you're presenting an algorithm, and I'm presenting it to an audience where people are more, wet lab biologists, for example. I cannot, there's no point in going over the details and the analysis of how, theoretical analysis of why it works, the timing analysis, the asymptotics. Maybe I can just present the, sort of the intuition, the idea, and I present it with the graph, and people get a vague idea of how things work and why they should work, and all of the theory, and this is fine. They've learned something. They've learned how your method works at a very high abstract level, and they don't need to learn the theory. So what you don't want to do is what I said. Do not try to present something that's not where your strong suits are. Just present maybe a little bit less. Maybe present less. Be careful with jargon, but still, you be you. All right. So things that you shouldn't do. All right. So if you say, I am going to skip this, why did you put it there? Please ignore this side of the plot. Okay, then why did you put it there? Since I'm running out of time, I'm going to skip. All of this is bad preparation. So either, and you made this mistake of you're reusing materials for the wrong talk, or if you're reusing things from the manuscript where you have to fit all of this information, you need to adapt the figures to the talk format. if you need to be keeping track of time. And maybe a slightly more subtle one is if you are saying this is this and this is that and this is that and this is that, that's, this laundry list, this is very tedious and people cannot keep track of it. I mean, we can keep track of a couple of things in our mind at the same time, but especially at the conference where we're tired, we've seen 27 presentations before yours, we can keep track of maybe two things, and so again, either you need to cut things out, or you need to link them better. So this is X, and X showed that's Y, but we worried about Z, and therefore we did this analysis. But if you hear yourself saying and this and that and that, and is a bad connector. The connector should be more therefore, however, in spite of, so that there's a bit more tension between the individual components rather than A and B, things that just sit next to each other. Do not oversell or undersell. So remember, we're again, this is about a scientific talk. You can use numbers. You should use numbers. You should be precise, and do not exaggerate. This frankly, this happens more with more senior people. That they come and they've solved everything. Don't do that. But the opposite problem, and that often happens more with junior researchers, is they undersell. So they're so worried about not exaggerating that they end up focusing on the negatives. And often, again, I'm not saying you should not be forthcoming, but focus on the positive. So for example, our tool SemiBin actually doesn't work for eukaryotic data. But it works very well for prokaryotic data. And and whenever someone asks, and this is even in the FAQ, yes, do not use it for eukaryotic data. I generally do not lead with that. That's not it's a great tool for prokaryotic data. That's so if you can, focus on what you can actually do, and if someone asks, yes, you don't need to say you haven't solved everything. Nobody ever has. But yes, so senior people, you oversell, but junior people also undersell, and they're a bit too shy about focusing on what they actually can do. All right, so this is a general rule of do not add things, do not spend time, do not put things on slides that serve to make your audience more confused. And a very common one is mathematical formulas. So for example, here, and this one is fairly simple one, a fairly well-known one, but adding this formula, for example, doesn't add anything, because if I say we used a linear model or a lasso model, so everybody who knows, anyone who can read this formula will know that this is a lasso model. And if you say a lasso model or a linear model, they do not learn anything from having this formula. On the other hand, there will be other people who just are trying to understand the formula. They struggle, and they also don't get anything. So nobody in the audience benefits from having this type of materials, unless it is relevant. And if it is about, and if you're presenting a more technical thing and you need to show but then you need to pace yourself, you need to give it the time, you need to explain, you need to center this. Okay, this is important, so I'm going to explain it, I'm going to spend the time, but don't put complicated elements, that are not central to your main arguments. Right? Cite the sources you use. It's actually often okay to use materials from others. Again, not too much, but sometimes yes. But you have to cite it. If you can support specific statements, cite it, and it should never be unclear what is your work and what is someone else's work. This should always be 100% clear, and because here's the thing, like if you put some graph from somebody else, there's a good chance, the world is small, fields are small, that person is in the audience, and people love it when they see their own name on the slide. So you put someone says, oh, this is such and such from author and all, an author happens to be sitting in the audience, and you're giving them credit. People love it. If you put the same thing but you do not explicitly credit the person, they will be upset. They will feel, rightfully so, that they are getting credit taken from them. So it should always be clear, is this your work or is this somebody else's work? And when I say yours, again, it means authors of the presentation, which can include multiple people. So not from your group. So the plural you, but it should be clear who has done what. Being nervous is normal. So this is now comes back to this is a little bit more personal how you handle this, but do know that apparently Lionel Messi, and it's probably very hard to be more successful than Lionel Messi as an athlete, but apparently even now, and when he's already, maybe now that he's won the World Cup, he doesn't get nervous, but even very recently he was a pile of nerves before coming into the field. And and what I imagine happens, and I'm not friends with Lionel Messi, but what I imagine happens is that once the game starts, when he starts playing, that all goes away, and now he's in his element, playing football, and he can focus on what he's doing. And I think this happens, and I'm saying because I think this does happen to a lot of people, where it's the worst is it's not the presentation itself. It's like these last few minutes, where you're waiting to start, and then once you actually start, that's things flow. And so here, for example, one thing you can do is just prepare better. Maybe I don't recommend you do this for the most part, but maybe the very first few sentences you want to have them memorized, so you know exactly what you do, exactly your initial statement, and then things flow from there. A little bit of stress is good. A little bit of stress focuses you. If you also don't want to be too relaxed, because if you don't care, nobody else will. But you don't want to be too stressed out. Some people start speaking very fast when they're stressed out, and then, this is again, if you speak very fast, nobody will understand you, and you'll finish very, so this is why the breadcrumbs can be useful. And some people end up they get so nervous they cannot find the words, and they end up taking a lot more time because they're too nervous. They don't, and this is why I say, maybe like the initial couple of sentences or the initial 1 minute, you can have that memorized, and that can help you get over this initial hump. Having said that, a lot of this is very personal on how you manage and decrease your stress, but do know that this is normal, and a little bit of stress is okay. It's just everybody has this little bit of stage fright. So I've done now this many times, where I've given this talk. We do this course where also there's peer feedback, and by a large margin, the most common piece of feedback on other presentations is please make the fonts bigger. This comes from this problem of you prepare your presentation on a laptop where you are reading it from 30 centimeters away, and then you present in a big room with a crappy projector. People have to read it from the back of the room. So make fonts bigger. You do not pay by the slide. You can have more slides if you need to, but make your fonts bigger. So just to summarize, practice is important. Practice, preparation is important. Always think for whom, for what purpose, and maybe as a final, I will leave you with this message this is from a coffee shop here in Shanghai, where their motto is less better. So this is a good motto also for slides, for life, less better. So thank you everyone for listening. So there's a link to these in the description below. Do do subscribe to the channel. We normally do more science type talks, but since I wanted to show you this, any questions, email, comment below, join our Discord server, Twitter DM, and I hope to see you soon.